It's very difficult to explain.
The former Prince Andrew has tonight been released under investigation from a police station in Norfolk, where he has spent the day in custody following his arrest this morning on suspicion of misconduct in public office.
So while he was not seen at Sandringham today, following the events of the last few weeks, a significant move from politicians tonight. The government...
There are no dragons and no sharks here.
But removing Andrew from the line of succession isn't entirely straightforward, despite the severity of the allegations
from a
against
young
him.
Russian woman. Did that happen?
No.
You're absolutely sure, or you can't remember?
Absolutely sure.
Of your brother, sir. Your Majesty, how are you feeling?
That might be their hope, but it is difficult to see how this will play out for the royals when police are searching the former home of the King's brother on the Windsor estate.
February 19th, 2026. 8 a.m. Several unmarked police cars arrive at Sandringham Estate to make an arrest, but despite procedure, experience and planning, this arrest would not be like any other. As the former Prince, former Duke of York, and former member of the royal family, Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor was arrested on the morning of his 66th birthday. At the same time, 130 miles away in Windsor, another group of police arrived at the Royal Lodge, Andrew's former residence before his dismissal from the royal family. Their goal? To search and secure any evidence they might find on the property. But what were they looking for?
The offence for which Mountbatten-Windsor is being investigated is misconduct in public office. This is a almost unique type of offence. It's not prosecuted very often. It's regarded as such a serious crime that it can carry up to life imprisonment.
By 9 a.m, journalists, reporters, and cameras line the road leading to the royal estate as police cordoned off the entrance. By 10 a.m, the BBC had begun reporting on Andrew's arrest.
So the arrest was about not the associations with Epstein, which is still being investigated, but actually about his activities in public office. So he was, of course, a trade envoy, and there's alleged links with China, passing on information, not being entirely transparent and accountable in that role. So should a royal have that kind of role, have that kind of privilege and access, especially if what he's doing is not fully accounted for?
Misconduct in public office is a rather vague offence. Is that misconduct in public office is committed when someone so seriously neglects their duties or misconducts themselves that they abuse public trust.
The arrest of Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor should be exactly the same as it would be for any other person. However, the reality is bound to have been rather different.
Within 2 hours, the former prince's reality had shifted entirely. Andrew was held in Aylsham police station for 12 hours, 40 miles from Sandringham Estate. The once royal, now in a 2-metre by 3-metre cell, with a bed, thin mattress, and an in-cell toilet. The barest of necessities and a physical reminder of the situation Andrew finds himself in.
I think, the word unprecedented is bandied around a lot, but it's absolutely true. A senior royal has not been arrested for 350 years, since Charles I was arrested, subsequently tried and beheaded. This is really significant. I think there is questions about the accountability and transparency of the monarchy, and I think, the failure, in a sense, to move with the times and understand the responsibilities to the public that they have, and this sense that they could be exempt from public scrutiny and accountability. So I think that's a failing. Again, you get someone like Andrew who is susceptible to, influence, who likes being courted, who likes the high life, then clearly there's vulnerability there.
The arrest was pre-planned. It wasn't something that was spontaneous. And there will have been a lot of thought gone into it. Policing these days is so concerned about perception. How will this look? That senior officers will have planned it to the nth degree. Because they're as much concerned about how will this come across in the newspapers and on the broader media as it will be, well, how are we going to find the evidence that we're looking for?
I think it's important to draw a distinction between the activities of Andrew as a trade envoy, which of course he was arrested for, and the alleged activities of him in association with Epstein. So at the moment, the investigations and certainly that arrest was about his actions in public office.
The story around Mountbatten-Windsor is not going away. The release of millions of documents via the Epstein files will ensure that it stays prominent, it stays in the newspapers. Now, it may be that this investigation into Mountbatten-Windsor spreads beyond an allegation of misconduct in public office and may go into allegations of a different nature. But somebody will have to allege the crime, and the police will then have to decide whether it meets what they call the evidential threshold, whether there's enough evidence on the face of it to then investigate further. It's going to run and run, this story, and there's more to come from Epstein files, much, much more to come. The media are not letting go of it, the public are not letting go of it, and I hope that one day everything, and I mean everything, in regards to Mountbatten-Windsor's conduct is laid bare for all to see, and should there be sufficient evidence to justify charges, then I hope they will be forthcoming.
Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip proudly introduced Prince Andrew.
February 19th, 1960, 3:30 p.m. A prince is born. Andrew was the first child born to a reigning British monarch since Princess Beatrice, the youngest daughter of Queen Victoria, in 1857. From the moment he entered public life, Andrew was embraced as a fresh, modern face of the monarchy.
Andrew's upbringing was a mixture of duty and expectation, but also gradually a more modern kind of upbringing. The Queen was now on the throne. She already had 2 children, Prince Charles, who was 12, Princess Anne, who was 9, and now Prince Andrew.
Being born into the royal family, especially if you're high in the line of succession, as Prince Andrew was when he was a child, means that it's very difficult to plan for any future other than being a working royal.
He followed in his brother's footsteps after having a governess at home for his early years education. He went to a preparatory school and then went to Gordonstoun in Scotland, where his father and his brother would go. Unlike his brother Charles, the King, who found that a very challenging environment. It was all about physical pursuits. It was all about pushing yourself to the extreme. Andrew, who was much more athletic and outgoing than his brother, seemed to really revel in that.
And if he gets fed up with school, the prince is allowed the odd trip into Lakefield Village, where he can be sure of at least one warm welcome and a good square meal.
And so in many ways, the expectations around Andrew were like other royal spares. He was to conform to royal expectation around duty, but he didn't have a future mapped out for him, as of course his elder brother did.
Charming, confident, and far more relatable than his predecessors, he represented a new generation. His deployment to the Falklands cemented his image as the bold, duty-driven prince.
I've been shocked at what has happened, the way that the ships were taken out. It is a really nasty. I mean, I think that a small missile, perhaps 18 feet long, can do that much damage. And I think we've all seen the photographs of HMS Sheffield and Atlantic Conveyor, or if not, I saw Atlantic Conveyor myself. She was a burning wreck. I mean, it was quite horrific. And on the other side, the pride of which to see how the British force actually worked together. And this was absolutely amazing. It really was.
It's been a tradition in the royal family going back generations that when they're young, as young men, they typically serve in the armed forces, in the army, the navy, or the air force. We've seen that Charles did that. We've seen that Prince William has done that, and we've seen that Prince Andrew did that too.
And so in that sense, Andrew was doing what other royal sons had done. What was particularly notable in his case was that he actually saw active service. And I think that had an impact on him. He came home something of a hero.
It's the only time in their lives that they might have done what you or I might call a proper job. And it's possibly the only time in their lives that they've had the opportunity, at least amongst their fellow servicemen and women, to be treated like an ordinary individual. And for that reason, I think it's really important experience for them to have had.
I have a mate who served in the Navy during the Falklands conflict, and they sailed victoriously back to the UK. It was on the same ship as Andrew, Mountbatten-Windsor. And not long after he'd landed, we had a homecoming party for him. He told me a story about Mountbatten-Windsor. They were celebrating wildly. Buckets of water were being thrown over people, and it was just good, celebratory fun on board a warship. One of the naval ratings went to throw a bucket of water over Mountbatten-Windsor, and he said to them, "Throw that bucket of water over me and you will remain a rating for the rest of your career." Needless to say, my mate and some of his naval colleagues did not thereafter hold Mountbatten-Windsor in a very favourable light.
On his return from the Falklands, he really did begin to live a kind of social life that was all about mixing with attractive women, living the high life. And it was at that point that he became the kind of subject of media scrutiny.
The media leaned into that narrative. The war hero, the confident bachelor, the royal who seemed to revel in attention. His reputation for open, enthusiastic promiscuity wasn't hidden. It was celebrated.
That's how the prince's first great love, the delectable Miss Coo Stark, apparently went wrong. The prospect of a royal prince marrying a soft porn starlet was just not on.
It's really interesting how headlines in the press would talk about Andrew as Randy Andy in a way that was kind of like acceptable. He was on a chat show with Selena Scott, and you know, he was basically just really flirting with her.
You have. I'm listening. Which nickname? I feel a bit embarrassing.
And she, to be fair, was really flirting with him, but it really did lean into this whole reputation of him being a bit of a playboy.
Randy Andy. I'll tell you exactly where that originated from. My second day at public school. You were 14, 15 years old? I'm afraid so. And I was unfortunately caught going through a door in the girls' house saying hello to somebody. And it stuck. Not many people use it nowadays, but I don't think that it actually fits today, anyway.
The tabloids fed on it. The public laughed along. Andrew for a time was untouchable, but that golden period was fragile. The line of succession shifted the moment William was born. Overnight, the possibility of becoming king drifted out of reach. And with the throne no longer a distant but possible future, Andrew's habits, long established and rarely challenged, only calcified. The structure that might have held him in place slipped further away. We start to see the man he would eventually become, or perhaps the man he always was.
I think it's hard to say that if Andrew was the direct heir, whether he would have behaved differently. I think certainly he had a more outgoing personality, he was more athletic, he was perhaps more good-looking than his elder brother. But it perhaps is also true that if he had his future mapped out and he was going to be king, there would have perhaps been a tighter focus and scrutiny of him.
As well as I can. About as well as I suppose I get half at least. I shall try anyway. If at first you don't succeed, try again, they say.
All the other royal families around Europe have had their experience of scandals, of members of the royal family who've gone off the rails, and they've dealt with it in their own ways. Typically, that person cannot be expelled from the family, because even if you've done wrong, you're still a family member. You're still a sister or a brother or a cousin or a child. So we're not alone in Britain in having members of the royal family or people that they've married who've gone off the rails.
But I think now we've got three real separate camps within the UK. We've got pro-royalty, we've got Republicans, and somewhere in between we've got people who, quite frankly, don't give a damn.
All families have their black sheep. In practice, what we see is it doesn't necessarily affect public support for the institution as a whole. The public are perfectly capable of distinguishing between one bad actor and the public institution.
The very fabric of society is at stake when we start to not trust the police, royalty. And if it then turns into everyone for themselves, very, very bad things can happen.
From the outside, his life looked magnificent. Privilege, status, and a future laid out long before he could decide who he wanted to become. But growing up in that rarefied world comes with its own distortions. A childhood shaped by extraordinary protection can leave a person insulated from consequence and hungry for experiences that feel normal, even rebellious. In Andrew's case, those early patterns formed a blueprint. The need for admiration, the thrill of escape, and a gradual blurring of what should have been clear moral boundaries. His marriage to Sarah Ferguson only added to the complexity.
When people thought, oh my goodness, this is now this really charismatic couple coming together. Sarah Ferguson, Fergie as she was known, was sort of fun-loving, gregarious, outgoing, not very sort of typical for somebody marrying into the royal family. And so then all attention was on this fun-loving couple that was a kind of contrast to the wedding that had gone before, which was Charles and Diana, much more of an age gap between them. I think even, when they first came together, the famous engagement interview where Charles is talking about, whatever love is. In contrast, Fergie and Andrew seemed to be very much in love. It seemed like a love story.
Is there just somewhere inside you a certain sadness in a way that you've been taken over by the great ceremony and all the guests you have to have, as we've heard?
Yeah.
That it's not quite your day as it might have been?
Sarah's got 600 of the 720 guests.
What? It's very, very much my day. I'm marrying Andrew, and that's all there is about it. It is so much my day, because I'm going to be with him, and I'm doing it for him. I'm not doing it for the rest of the world. I'm very sad not to be getting married in Dunbar Village Church, but I'm equally so delighted to be getting married in the Abbey. Anywhere would do, whether it's Gretna Green, anywhere. I'm quite happy because I'm married.
What began as a union full of optimism quickly became tabloid fuel. Rumours of infidelity, money troubles, and the infamous sting operation that exposed her willingness to trade introductions for cash. It all fed a sense of instability around them.
Yeah, okay, but then if you want to go to, and then if we want to do a big deal with Andrew, then that's the big one.
I do want, of course. Okay, of course. So you 500,000 in.
Yeah, but that's in wire transfer.
That has to be wire transfer, obviously.
Mountbatten-Windsor's former wife, Sarah Ferguson, has consistently shown over the years that she has the ability to demean herself, to make a mockery of herself. From sucking toes to falling for a journalist working undercover, to becoming friendly with a monster like Epstein, and more. It appears to me she'd do almost anything for money.
He's going to be kind enough to want to play, then Andrew will play.
Let's play.
And he says, let's play.
And woven through this chapter was a friendship that would carry far darker implications. Their closeness with Ghislaine Maxwell. A turbulent marriage, mutual dependencies and the intoxicating pull of powerful social circles may have shaped Andrew's worldview at a critical time.
Anybody want to talk about Prince Andrew? Any opinions on Prince Andrew they want to talk about? Film for a documentary. You want to have your say, and now's the chance.
Yeah, the car coming in like 2 minutes.
Got a car coming in 2 minutes. You want to talk about Prince Andrew and the royal family for 2 minutes for a documentary? Got any opinions about it? I don't have any opinions. No opinions. We're making a documentary, and we're asking members of the public, people that are close to our age as well, like, just to see what people are thinking. So yeah, when you're on Instagram or any like social media, what are you seeing about the royal family?
Well, I see a lot about, of course, everything about Prince Andrew.
I think what I see is like people know about it and have known about it and they're disgusted, but I feel like there was not a lot of outrage past maybe a couple like hours in a day, like at one point, and then it just sort of disappeared again.
But obviously tourists and all these people, whenever they come to Buckingham Palace, they're still going to love the royal family, you know, regardless. But other people that are born and bred in London, UK-wise, they know what's going on.
I think like we've sort of come to that realization like, oh, nothing's going to happen. And I think that's settling in for people now because they don't know what to do. They're making the decision not to do anything, but like because we haven't made an alternative yet.
I think unfortunately because he's like very, like from very rich family, and I think he's very protected, even though what he has done is very protected. So I think unfortunately, I hope so, but I think the victim won't really be, they're not going to get really a lot or anything from this.
I think it's part of a greater problem, right? I think it's desensitization and kind of how we've all grown up and how these things are reported as well. I think people underestimate the gravity of these things and they don't look at it as, you know, it's the horrible thing that's happened. How can we prevent it, right? I don't think it's action-based. So unfortunately, I think kind of people become helpless and they create memes out of it and that sort of stuff.
Like my mom, my dad, they were like, oh my God, like royal family has been arrested. For me, it wasn't that big of a news, but for them, like for the older generation, from what I've heard, it's like a really big thing for them, and they were like really shocked about it.
From my point of view, growing up in a working class family of the north of England, even if you're a socialist and a Labour Party voter, you're in favour of the Queen. The royal family was a kind of symbol of being British, but now I really couldn't give a toss. The British monarchy is over 1,000 years old, and I fully expect it will continue for several hundred years to come, because ultimately it depends on two things. It depends on support from the government and from the wider public, and those things are interconnected. But the opinion polls have shown consistently for tens of years public support for the monarchy ranging between 60 and 80%. And even since the scandal about Prince Andrew, just in the last 6 months, there's been no sign in the opinion polls of that public support significantly being dented.
In my lifetime, as a child, I was raised to respect royalty. So that whole deference that I was raised to show to those bodies and members of those bodies is simply melting away. The establishment has been exposed in recent years for much of its wrongdoing. And consequently, we are travelling at a very swift pace towards becoming a low-trust society. There is an obligation upon every public body and every public servant to drag their reputations out of the gutter, which is where so many of them lie, and to reinstill a sense of pride in what they do, a sense of then public appreciation for what they do, so that trust in our public bodies can be rekindled. Because at the moment, we're heading towards a very dark place.
Staff who work closely with him recall a man restless, eager for distraction, and convinced the rules didn't apply. As Andrew entered his 40s, the pattern intensified. He was a fixture in the so-called IT clubs of the 80s and 90s, surrounded by people half his age. Some chalked it up to a midlife crisis. Others whispered about something far less innocent. Gone is the party prince, the tabloid spectacle. In his place emerges a darker world, Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell.
Epstein has been this kind of name and story that's been circling for years, and I don't think really it's had the cut through that certainly it now has. I don't think there was any sense of this, certainly I didn't have, of this individual who was such a prolific paedophile at the sort of centre of this network, this exploitative sex trafficking network that drew in the rich and powerful abusing, young women. I had no sense of that. And so originally when that Epstein photo, it seemed like this is Andrew as making poor choices again.
Epstein built a network of wealth, influence and power, surrounding himself with people who considered themselves untouchable. Maxwell, always the facilitator, made it work, introducing, enabling and orchestrating access.
Viewing things from afar like I've done, it seems to me to be rather convenient that Ghislaine Maxwell has been convicted and sentenced, and I can't see anybody else. Surely it wasn't just Epstein and Maxwell. Where were the other people who got involved? Because I can't help but think there must be some others somewhere.
For Epstein, having a member of the British royal family in his orbit was more than status. It was a symbol of control.
If a person has had a life of privilege for all of their life, and if they've become used to doing whatever they want to do, then it wouldn't come as any surprise to me if a person like that did not behave in the way that most decent, law-abiding people who understand the meaning of the word consent actually behave.
He was seen to kind of always perhaps be susceptible to the wrong kind of influence. So I think it was seen as part of that. I don't think anybody sort of put the two together in thinking, this is Andrew hanging out with a sex predator.
The whole horrors around Epstein still need investigating to the absolute nth degree. Every single allegation of his wrongdoing must be thoroughly investigated to see if there are other co-conspirators.
Andrew's presence in Epstein's circle has been heavily scrutinised. The available material has been cited by critics as raising questions beyond mere social contact. The material cited by investigators and journalists has been said to show proximity to Epstein's circle. Critics argue it raises serious questions, but Andrew denies wrongdoing and has not been convicted of these allegations. But these allegations raise questions about knowledge and responsibility.
Did you introduce Virginia Roberts? Are you planning to say any more to Prince Andrew? What did you say in your statement?
Then there are the allegations from Virginia Giuffre. She claims to have had 3 sexual encounters with Andrew, each described as more intense and traumatic than the last. The first in Maxwell's home in Belgravia, London, where Virginia alleged that she was forced to have sex with Andrew in a bathtub by Epstein and Maxwell. The second time in Epstein's New York townhouse, and the third time on Epstein's island, Little St. James, where Virginia alleged that she took part in an orgy with the 2 men with other girls who were clearly underage and couldn't speak English. These allegations suggest a man fully aware of what was happening, complicit in Epstein's sexual depravity and exploitation. In 2010, Andrew spent 4 days at Epstein's New York townhouse. Photographed together in Central Park, the casual image masks serious implications. At the same time Andrew faced financial strain, Epstein allegedly provided £15,000 for Sarah Ferguson and a proposed £1 million business deal to cover Andrew's debts, tying and obligating him further into the orbit of one of America's most notorious pedophiles.
It is so important that this investigation is thorough and that it is fearless and that it is not compromised in any way. Because if the public feel that it is, if the public feel that the police might have gone, oh, we're not actually going to look into that very dark corner, there'll be absolute outrage. And people won't just direct it at Andrew, they'll direct it at the royal family. He's the king's brother.
There's no tension between the principle of everyone being equal before the law and being a royal. The only person who is above the law, literally, is the sovereign, because the king can do no wrong. So the sovereign does have immunity, but no other member of the royal family does. And we've seen that in recent examples. For example, Princess Anne, not so long ago, had a conviction under the Dangerous Dogs Act when her dog in Windsor Great Park unfortunately bit a child.
So what happened at the end of that case? Was her dog put down?
From memory, she was ordered to pay a fine of £500 and costs.
Senior police officers, the very senior police officers, they love being in the corridors of power with politicians and the elites and the such like. However, I'm hoping that times have moved on and that those who commit crimes or against whom allegations are made, no matter who they are, no matter what position they occupy, will be investigated fairly and thoroughly. If not, it only gives rise to the Republican movement, those who want to see the abolition of the monarchy, and those who have so much contempt for the establishment.
Flights, parties, money, photographs, choices made freely, privilege unchecked, responsibility ignored, accountability absent. What emerges is a man enmeshed in one of the most disturbing scandals of modern history, a figure caught between entitlement, indulgence, and the consequences of his own actions. But his arrogance would be his biggest downfall. Andrew's 2019 Newsnight interview. On the surface, it was meant to be a chance to tell his side of the story. But the obvious question is, how could he possibly think this was a good idea?
Newsnight had been looking to interview Andrew for some time, and originally Andrew, who was involved in this Pitch to the Palace initiative, which was where sort of young entrepreneurs would pitch ideas in a kind of Dragon's Den way and try and get funding and support. And he was looking to do an interview about, his Pitch to the Palace scheme to show, his good works and what he was doing. And Newsnight were very clear that, they weren't really interested in doing a puff piece for Andrew, but would want a kind of no-holds-barred, quite direct interview. There was a sense, certainly from Andrew, and we don't know really what his daughters thought about it, but that it would be a good thing. He made clear in the interview that this wasn't at the request of his mother and that she wasn't involved in it. But I think it speaks to his sense of arrogance, that he really believed he could manage this, that his narrative was absolutely going to shut all of this down.
It's hard to say when public support for Prince Andrew began to slip. I haven't looked back at the polling data, but I think from memory, over 5 years ago, or maybe at the time of the Emily Maitlis interview, when support for him would have started to crash.
He was really puffed up and proud that he felt the interview had gone really well, when of course, the BBC producers couldn't believe what had just happened. And so total arrogance and naivety. And I think If there needed to be a kind of absolute last straw sense that Andrew, you know, there really was no way back, I think that interview was it. I mean, it was disastrous. There have been many disastrous royal interviews, and that has to be one of the worst.
And so the reputational damage to him spreads much further than just him and his, at very best, unsavoury behaviour.
The rising, shocking, and a distraction. I mean, there are all sorts of things that are on the internet and out there in the public domain that we just sort of go, well, yeah, but I'm afraid this is, it just never happened.
You've talked about a thick skin.
President, do you have a comment on Prince Andrew stepping down from his royal duties?
On who?
Prince Andrew stepping down from his royal duties.
No, I don't know Prince Andrew, but it's a tough story. It's a very tough story. I don't know him.
A man insulated by privilege, long shielded from consequence, suddenly believing a televised explanation could undo years of misjudgment. And when it failed, as it inevitably did, he seemed unable to comprehend the fallout. The interview wasn't just bad, it was historic in its miscalculation. Every word, every gesture, amplified scrutiny and cemented public perception. It became the catalyst. It prompted Virginia Giuffre to officially include Andrew in her legal case against Epstein and Maxwell.
He knows exactly what he's done, and I hope he comes clean about it.
The royal family paid roughly £12 million to settle Giuffre's case, quietly trying to shield the monarchy from further fallout. Andrew was stripped of his official titles and duties, a once prominent figure reduced to a shadow at family events. And when Queen Elizabeth II died later that year, Andrew lost the last of his safety net.
It is a largely symbolic act, and legislation hasn't gone through to kind of formally change the line of succession, or indeed remove Andrew from being a Councillor of State, which basically means that he is one of the senior royals in terms of the line of succession. So in some ways it is symbolic, but of course along with that has gone this absolute abandonment of the royal family from Andrew, that he now has, you know, no public visibility, and the expectation that he really stays not in exile as it were abroad, and not imprisoned as such, but largely, you know, confined to this property in Norfolk, and in that sense in an exile of sorts.
Whilst Mountbatten-Windsor has been stripped of titles and people think stripped of certain privileges and all that kind of stuff, it means nothing to the man and woman in the street, because we've never had those titles, we've never had those privileges, so him being stripped of them doesn't impact upon us. It's not like we suddenly have sympathy for the fella.
I think people exaggerate the current difficulties caused by the Prince Andrew scandals. It was a much more serious crisis when King Edward VIII was forced to abdicate in the mid-1930s. Public support for the monarchy was much less when Queen Victoria went into hiding during her mourning, her long periods of mourning after the death of Prince Albert. So where we are today is nothing like as serious. This is a mere blip compared with those much more serious crises.
No, and he's not suffering. The fact that he's had to move to some lodge on his brother's estate in Sandringham, and rumours have it he's still got a chef and a valet.
The interesting thing at the moment anyway is that it has not so far tarnished public support for monarchy as an institution. So far as I know, public support for monarchy as their form of government, providing their head of state, continues to be very high.
I'm not saying off with their heads or abolish them tomorrow, but if they disappeared, would anybody notice?
No, he's protected. He's very well protected. And the fact that his family are protecting him, knowing what he's done, is even worse. So, in my opinion, the family's gonna be the same. You know, nothing's gonna change. Couple years down the line, even 100 years down the line, I don't know. The next generation of the family is gonna have to pick up the pieces of what's been broken. So That's why I'll leave it there.
Yeah, I think just hearing the victims, being able to give them some sort of a platform, not silencing them, not trying to twist a narrative, and then kind of taking the next steps, documenting what has happened, taking the next steps for justice for them, and then also preventable measures as well for anybody out there in the future.
People don't have these things. He's still got privilege. He's still got position. And so, sympathy for him? No.
Removed from almost all royal occasions and barred from certain estates, he became a national embarrassment, a laughingstock. Public reaction was immediate. Clips, memes, social media commentary. The story became a joke for the masses. And yet, despite all this humiliation, Andrew retained protections and privileges most ordinary citizens could only dream of.
The police officers that protect the royal family kind of fall into two brackets here. You have the royalty and protection uniformed officers, who generally speaking stand guard around the properties. And then you have the close protection officers, who wear plain clothes and are with their principal 24 hours a day. I think there is more to be exposed from some of those officers, although you probably won't be surprised to know that those who are engaged in the close protection of the monarch and other senior royals are chosen for their discretion and their ability to keep a secret.
I think the impact this scandal will have on the royal family and perceptions of it, it's going to depend. I think at the moment there's a kind of fine line between criticism of Charles and the family for knowing that Andrew was dodgy, for want of a better term, for many years, but not really doing enough to actually sort of out him. There's even been criticism in recent times against the late Queen Elizabeth II, his mother, for sort of protecting him, for making that payment allegedly to Virginia Giuffre, essentially for her to go away and shut up at the time of the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. So criticism, I think, can be levelled there.
All of that, the titles, the influence, the protective walls, would eventually be tested. And in 2026, Andrew's world changed entirely. The joke, the embarrassment, the media spectacle gave way to something far more serious. Real consequences, finally catching up with a prince long shielded from them. In the UK, Andrew has become the first high-profile figure to face legal action linked to Epstein. There have been allegations, not yet proven in court, concerning whether sensitive material was shared during his time as trade envoy. It's important to note, Andrew is not being charged with any sexual offences. So what does justice look like in this case? For ordinary citizens, the challenge is clear. How do we hold the untouchable accountable in a system designed to protect privilege? The case against Andrew, and the scrutiny now falling on others in his orbit, offers a rare glimpse of accountability, but it also forces a harder question. Can institutional power and influence ever be fully challenged? As the files continue to emerge, and the world watches, one thing is certain. This is no longer just a story of a disgraced prince. It's a reckoning, a mirror reflecting how power, wealth and secrecy shield wrongdoing, and how the public might demand justice for those who have long been beyond reach.
Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor has no lasting legacy. Any credit he may have had from years ago for serving as a helicopter pilot in the Navy, that's all been shredded, binned, trashed.
I think generally people want Andrew to face justice and be called to account to answer for himself. I think people think he obviously knew Epstein and had involvement and associations with what Epstein was doing. Whether that meant that he himself was doing illegal activity, that remains to be said. But I think on the very least, people think, why would he not testify what he knows?
We don't yet know whether the evidence from the Epstein files might lead to Andrew being prosecuted for trafficking for the purpose of sexual exploitation. That is a very serious charge. But simply from what has been disclosed so far, I'm not surprised that public opinion about Prince Andrew is very, very strongly negative. His public disapproval ratings are below 90%, and you don't get much lower than that.
And I think also people would say, you know, probably Andrew's a wrong 'un, and if there is evidence and a case to be brought, it absolutely should be heard. The King has been really clear that the course of law should be followed, so it remains to be seen. I think people would absolutely like Andrew to be, you know, to be in court, to face charges, but yeah, it very much depends on where the evidence is.
If anybody shies away from coming forward and telling the truth, the slate needs to be cleaned as much as it possibly can, because Mountbatten-Windsor will forever be perceived and regarded as a member of the royal family, and the damage he does then spreads by contagion to the other members of that establishment. The direction of travel should be, of course, straight ahead, with openness, with honesty, and with transparency. And there's our books. Have a look at them. Anything less will damage the monarchy, damage the royal family, tarnish their reputation, and may just signal the beginning of the end.
When the NSPCC first approached me to lead their campaign to end cruelty to children, as a father, I understood the importance of the NSPCC's intent and mission. Make no mistake, the concept of the eradication of child abuse within a generation was and still is a gargantuan task, and one that can never stop.